If there's one thing that I've noticed that's happened over the last several years in the guitar world, it's that people have begun to assume that if a guitar has lots of inlays or lots of pearl on it, that it must not sound good, because I think that people assume that the builder must be hiding something. Clearly they're adding all of that sparkle to the guitar because they just want people to buy it, and the people that buy guitars like that don't really care about sound. And on the flip side of that, we have another whole side of the guitar market that has really leaned heavily into vintage and relic guitars. And I think I am beginning to understand how we've gotten to this point as guitar buyers. I feel like most of us buy our guitars on the internet these days. As much as we'd prefer to be buying them in person at our local music store, we all know that local music stores are starting to disappear because of the heavy competition of the internet. And what we have to do at first is to buy a guitar with our eyes. As a builder of guitars, I often find myself in a situation that I assume is not a whole lot different than the large manufacturers of guitars. I have to build an instrument and then take photographs of it and try to get some audio recordings of it and put them on my website, and then try to convince you, the person who's on the other side of the internet website, that you should buy the guitar. And you, as the potential buyer, are only armed with mostly your eyeballs. You have to look at the guitar and decide whether or not you're visually attracted to it. And then if there is an audio recording of the guitar, to decide whether or not you like it, but also try to decipher how much of that is the sound of the guitar or how much of it's the microphone or the speakers on my computer. So what happens as a maker, especially the larger manufacturers, I think you have two choices. You either build a guitar that is heavily relicked and tries to build what is the image of a long life-lived story into the guitar by putting the scratches and the dents and making it look like that it's well played, in the hopes that you as a buyer will see that guitar and fall in love with it and feel like, wow, I would love to be a part of that guitar's next chapter. And the other side of it is that a lot of manufacturers these days will build like a limited edition guitar or a special guitar that is kind of at the top end of their lineup, and that guitar usually has a lot of pearl on it, maybe some really nice inlays, has really high-end tone woods on it with, you know, special tuning machines, and it's going for 5 figures, and it's kind of a flagship guitar. And what happens for a lot of folks is you put those really high-end, you know, really custom limited edition guitars really high up in your mind as far as how they must sound, and then one day you walk into your local music store and you see that they've got that guitar and you strum it, and it doesn't even sound that great. It doesn't sound much better than a guitar that costs, you know, 1/10 as much. But you do know that all those old guitars that you've played over your lifetime, those old vintage Martins and Gibsons and your buddy's guitar that he bought in 1972, man, it might not look really nice, but my God, does it play good, and my God, does it sound good. And so what's happened is that manufacturers, I feel like these days, have really leaned a lot more heavily into building you a guitar that looks like the way our mind's eye sees it an old guitar should look. And what that's done has led to a world that we live in, which is a really weird world, and it is that if a guitar looks beautiful, it must not sound good. And if a guitar looks like it's beat up, it sounds really great. And just like everything else in the world, a lot of that is marketing, and it's also not true most of the time. When it comes down to it, I think that what we're dealing with here the most is just human nature. We all want to feel attached to a story. Now, the difficult part about building new instruments, whether it's me or it's a large manufacturer, is that I can only build you a new guitar. I can't build you an old guitar. Now, that's what they're trying to do by adding all the scratches and the dents. But the reality of it is it's still a new guitar. It just looks old. So years ago, it occurred to me that while I might not be able to build you an old guitar, what I can do, unlike all of the manufacturers, is I can add your story to a guitar. I can help visually attach the life story that you have into the instrument so that it becomes an heirloom piece, something that you will cherish and have in your family for generations to come. And that is how, over the years, I've begun to do these incredibly elaborate inlays on my guitar. And as much as the internet sometimes, especially either in the comment section or whether or not I end up on some luthier's forum somewhere, As much as those people try to say that, oh God, look at that gaudy inlay on there, you know it must not sound good, because clearly he's trying to cover up the fact that it doesn't sound good with all of those inlays. That could not be further from the truth. The reality of the situation is I spend months and months building these guitars, with my first and only focus being on making sure that it sounds as good as it humanly can, and that it plays as good as it humanly can. After, and only after, I've spent all of that time doing that, I spend another further several months working with each individual client to help come up with, if they want it, an inlay on the guitar that represents a bit of their story. And this guitar is absolutely one of my favorites in that instance. What we've ended up doing on this guitar is my first really elaborate inlay with a human face on it. We ended up going with Bob Dylan and the lyrics to Knocking on Heaven's Door going down the fretboard. But to better help you guys understand of how I landed on that, I'd like to give you a little bit of the backstory about the inlay. Originally, when the customer came to me to have this guitar built, which at this point was about 7 years ago, I tell them, hey, think about what you want to do for your inlays while I'm building the guitar. That way, when we get to the inlay portion of it, you're not we're not starting from zero. And the client had told me, hey, listen, for me, Hotel California by the Eagles, that whole album was such just an important part of what made me a music fan and made me want to play guitar. So asked if I could actually do the album cover for Hotel California on the fretboard of this guitar. And, I worked with the client and said, as long as that is really important to you, that album in particular really is super important to you, then I'm happy to do that. And for those of you that have ever looked really closely at the Hotel California album cover, you'll notice that it's intentionally a little bit blurry and a little out of focus, and has really soft edges on all of everything, which was going to make it very difficult for me to make an inlay because I can't have soft edges on hard lines. So I had told the client that, hey, I don't think it's going to come out the way that you thought, but inevitably what I ended up needing to do was actually make the physical inlay so that I could show that it doesn't look good. So I spent about 2 weeks, hand cutting all the little pieces and making the Beverly Hills Hotel, and had little palm trees in front of it. And, I set it on the fretboard, not inlaid it, but just set it on top of there and sent photos to the client. And he saw it and went, you're right. So this is where the real magic happens. What I did is, he was getting ready to go on a trip, on a 1 week vacation somewhere. And I said, really think about what is important to you. It doesn't have to be musically important to you, but something that just really tells a bit of your story. And I remember when he came back from the trip, him being so excited because you could tell that the light bulb had gone off. And he tells me that, my son's name is Dylan because I love Bob Dylan. So there's an obvious thing, right? So let's do something with Bob Dylan on the guitar. Because his songs mean so much to me and they represent my life. And, like I said, my son's named Dylan, so that really ties it in. And we realized that we could do not only Bob Dylan, but I could add some other things going up the fretboard. And I found this awesome photograph, black and white photo of Bob Dylan smoking a cigarette and looking up. And what I did is I actually turned the smoke coming out of his cigarette into some of the lyrics of Knocking on Heaven's Door. And we added those to the fretboard. And in the end, after spending all of that time painstakingly trying to really kind of wring out what it is the story of this guitar was going to be, I made this inlay over the course of about 3 weeks. And it was just like one of those, yes, there it is. And back then, 5 years ago when I did the inlay, it was my favorite and has continued to be one of my absolute favorite inlays to date. And on top of that, this guitar has pretty much been locally living, so I've been able to have it back in the shop at least once or twice a year, whether it's to just buff out and to do setups on and just general maintenance things on the guitar. And I've gotten really used to just being able to spend some time with it. Well, the client has recently told me that he's selling most of his worldly possessions so that he could travel a lot more. So I have this guitar back in my workshop for, unfortunately, probably one of the last times. And I'm putting it up on the website so that you guys at home, if you're interested, can purchase this guitar and make it part of your story. All right, now that you guys have heard the story about this guitar and how I came up with the inlay and we put it on here, let's decide right here and now whether or not a guitar can both look good and sound good. So what I'm gonna do is place some songs on here and then let you decide. I won't make any input on my thoughts, but hopefully you guys can tell me whether or not you think that it checks all the boxes. All right, as always, we do have a Zoom H6 set up in front of the guitar, about a foot away from it using the XY microphones, and we are not going to be adding any sort of compression or EQ, no post-processing whatsoever, so you guys can hopefully trust what you're hearing.